Well, hello again, everybody. This is John Norris at Trading Perspectives. As always, we have our good friend Sam Clement, Courtney Trust. Y'all say hello.
How's it going?
Hey, John.
Hey, guys. This is going to be kind of a fun topic here this week. Last week, when I was making a presentation up in Huntsville, dynamic market here in the state of Alabama, one of the questions during the Q&A, believe it or not, was one that I hadn't gotten before, or if I have, I don't remember it, and that is, what keeps me up at night? Someone asked me, what keeps me up at night? And of course, I don't think the person was asking me whether or not monsters underneath my bed or skeletons in the closet. We can get back to that in just a little bit. But what, keeps me up at night in terms of the economy, in terms of the passing scene, and all that stuff. And I had to really stop and think about it. So I'm going to ask you all, and I have asked you all,
right?
What are some of the things that keep you up at night in regards to the economy and society and all that stuff? And Sam, as always, we're going to start with you. I mean, what keeps you up at night?
As always. First in the pecking order.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest things is just looking at the direction that especially I think our country is going culturally, and the divisiveness around it, and not necessarily the issues, but the hive mentality, the tribe mentality of you have to agree with everything that I say, or else you're awful, you're evil, and the worst person on earth. And I think it's been more prevalent. You see somebody who may be a religious leader or someone who did a lot of great things in their life, and then people have to immediately say what they disagreed with them an hour after they died, and just to prove their side.
Well, all right. So there we started off right there. That's a Gen Z, male, no children. So now we're going from that demographic to Courtney Trust,
yes,
a millennial of a certain age. Just celebrated a birthday recently. We won't say how many, but let's just say the fire department was called, and,
yes,
and all that. So a millennial female with a household of kids. What keeps you up at night?
It's hard to go after Sam because I'm like, oh, that is a really good one. But when you first asked us, what came to top of mind was, am I making the financial decisions today that I need to make to capitalize on the little bit of extra money I have now, like for the future? So it's constantly like, was it the best investment to put more money in the 529? Should I have put it in a brokerage account? Should I have invested in this? Should I have alternative, maybe invest in a house or real estate? And you always hear other people that have been successful with these one-off. You don't hear about as much when people don't do as well, and so I think that's what I sometimes will be having a hard time sleeping, because I'm thinking, are we doing what we need to be doing now to benefit us later in life?
All right, there you go. It's a little bit of difference,
More
I think.
Introspective.
Yeah, more introspective. And then as for me, old as dirt, waiting to die. I think, as Courtney has put it on several occasions, just waiting to die. Me and Beth sitting at the house, staring at the wall, making sure it's drying, and the dogs and all of that. But in all seriousness, Gen X, kids out of the house, and what keeps me up at night? I think really what keeps me up at night, and I'm not sure if this has always been the case, is just what I perceive to be relative economic illiteracy in our society, and just how do things actually work. I always felt as though maybe it's forgivable for the high school students to not actually understand how the world works. But now increasingly, I'm under the impression that there are a lot of people in positions of power that aren't really all that clear on how things actually work, and they're making policy for the rest of us without understanding really economics at all. So that actually is something that frustrates me. So that's a little bit different than y'all. I think maybe there might be some generational differences, because I'm thinking to myself, here we are, borderline in my estimation, some of this stuff, and this is just my opinion only, borderline almost anti-Americanism, because as Calvin Coolidge was famous for saying, the business of America is business, and yet business right now is in the crosshairs of just about everyone. And it's just kind of like, when did it become bad to win? When did it become bad to make money? When did it become bad to achieve greatness? And that's some of the stuff that frustrates me, and I've put things in economic terms.
And I'll add on to that. I think, I told you before that something that concerns me is the direction of parity between really the global north and the global south. essentially the G7 out in Australia, I guess, even
In
though
South
they're
Korea,
in
yeah.
South Korea, maybe Taiwan, but whatever you want to say, the reason I think we're trending more towards parity is exactly what you're talking about. The illiteracy economically, at least, I mean, and even global, policy, we are pushing ourselves down the G7. You see some of these discussions they have at those meetings, and it doesn't give you the warm and fuzzies that these countries that should be the global economic powerhouses are coming together and focusing on what's most important. Well, while you see, on the other hand, China has their own issues, economically maybe not as strong as they'd like to be, but these are countries that are focused on growing, taking market share, and becoming the biggest and baddest there are.
And Courtney, with your brood, all of them pretty young, does it ever keep you up at night wondering what the world will look like when they are becoming adults, and not even waiting that long, but the world in which we live, where they're being bombarded from so many conflicting messages? Does that keep you up at night?
Oh, for sure. I think that the idea of social media in general, and just how many times have you seen me even look at my phone while we're, sitting here doing a podcast, and it's like...
Well, you're always looking at that picture of
I know,
Ronaldo.
my beautiful family.
Cristiano Ronaldo.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
But no, you just think about how I was able to grow up in a time that I didn't have that distraction, where I literally was bored to death outside, where your parents would go outside and they would literally lock you out of the house, and you'd be making mud pies and stuff like that. And my kids get outside, they play, they do stuff. But I just worry because they're young now, and I'm at some point, you look at this generation, and especially the ones that were right after, I guess maybe closer to Sam's age.
Since we're different generations.
We are
right?
different generations. Yes, you're just a wee baby. But no, you've always had a cell phone. You've always had access to social media and stuff like that. Or maybe it's a little bit younger than you. But I just think about that. You look at the lasting effects of, the mental health side of it. And those are things that I can't wrap my hand around. I can't make that, but I would love to put them in a bubble and be that overbearing mom. But I'm also part of my childhood that I loved is that I had the freedom to make mistakes, and had, my parents gave me grace to forgive me, and I was okay, I survived them. And it's that constant battle as a parent of wanting to protect them and warn them, but also letting them make their own mistakes. And social media is just hard to...
You hit on it. I think to add on, another thing that concerns me is the global, or really at least in our country, the mental health crisis that has coincided and highly correlated with the increased use in social media, especially in younger people. And so I think that's something that, as you said, someone who doesn't have kids will have kids that are going to grow up in a time where everybody has social media. If the trends continue, it is a very scary future, and it already is scary.
One thing that it does I'm not sure if it keeps me up at night, but it does make me a little concerned. Maybe that's not the best adjective, but in any event, I find head scratching. Is that probably doesn't come as much of a surprise to y'all, but I was unclear what I wanted to do with my life when I was in college. I was still unsure about it until I was probably at 35. Just what I'm going to do. I didn't necessarily need to have it all mapped out. Frankly, the journey or the growth was part of the fun of it in a lot of ways. And I've had a great time, and I learned a lot, and it all worked out reasonably well, but I didn't have to have everything mapped out. And in college, I was a lifeguard. I was a garbage man, all that stuff. There wasn't quite the same level of, you have to have an internship. You've got to do this. You got to do this.
Yeah.
And now what I'm seeing, particularly with John, and with Nanny to a lesser degree, when she was going through school, everything needs to be mapped out. There needs to be, I don't have an internship. And John has friends that have internships over in Atlanta, being a bank teller and all this stuff. And John said, I was talking with John, I said, John, this is your last summer before you've got to go be an adult. Go have some fun. And I think that might have been the first time anyone's ever told him to have fun during the summertime. And that's really what it's kind of all about. So I guess I'm rambling a little bit, but I think there's just a lot of pressure on younger people these days to have it all figured out.
And at such a younger age.
And it took me a long time to have it figured out. And there are times when I question whether or not I even have it figured out now at my double nickels.
I think you see a little bit. I think with younger people, you see that. And then I think when postgraduate people, I think you start to see almost the opposite problem, almost no, focus on, taking care of yourself, financial responsibility, doing what you need to do to get off your parents' dime. It switches, and you are seeing both of those, I think, be problems, because you're absolutely right. I mean, kids in high school are already expected to have all this experience just to get into colleges, know what they want to do. They have to write about that. And then I think you're also seeing the flip side of it, though, people in their late 30s not really, having a plan, what they want to do, not being financially responsible. And
it's sort of like going back to Courtney, what she's worried about, is she investing money correctly? Should she put more money into the 529 plan? Should she buy a $65 teacup? Should she stock up on her creamer and the sausage that her family likes? These are all decisions.
Those are not
way on
investments.
her.
Those are just little joys in my life.
That keep Courtney up at night.
Should you buy a rental property? Should you, where should you put your money to make more money? What's a sound investment? But I go back, when you said, I think that's interesting, John. You didn't know what you wanted to be. You chose a good college. Obviously you've always been very smart.
Do go on.
Well, for me, I remember I didn't get into my first choice in college.
Which was?
Sewanee. I was going to go to the University of the South. My grandfather had gone there. I was going to be on the row team. I was going to major in political science. I had it all mapped out. And I got waitlisted. And they were like, oh, this was the biggest year. We had so many people apply. I'm sure not everyone will end up coming here. Well, it didn't work out for me. And I think, it was meant to be. I went to Birmingham Southern, great education. Was a political science major, was definitely going to go to law school until my senior year. And I was like, I don't want to go to law school. That is not what I want to do. But I still I was interested in politics. And so I went and worked in D.C. And I'm so thankful for that. And after doing that, I had the opportunity to get my MBA and switch to banking. But I never wanted to be a banker. I never wanted to be, I don't know. You look at it and you're like, well, people switch careers all the time. And I think that that's what's so unfair to tell an 18-year-old or even a 16-year-old that you're supposed to have it all figured out of what you want to do for the rest of your life and invest so much money in college.
I think it's tough because, capitalism in general drives competitiveness, and some people are going to do those things, and it's tough to feel like you're getting behind. If you want to get into schools, the people who have written out these letters of all their experience and their grades and all that are, you're always fighting. And, it reminds me when we talked about going to a 4-day work week. Yeah, some people are going to be fine with doing that, but other people are still going to want to work 5 days a week and get ahead more. And so you're always fighting that competitive edge of what are you okay with.
Yeah. Well, shifting gears just a little bit more on what keeps me up at night in the geopolitical sense is we've had the luxury as Americans really since the end of World War II to be able to be able to kind of set the rules.
Yeah.
Kind of what Sam was kind of touched on, global South, global North, and the American passport was very widely accepted, and it's kind of maybe Americans, all that stuff. I don't feel as though our nation's reputation is the same, nor do I feel as though we have exercised effective control or power or set the right example in a lot of ways. And moving forward, what does the world look like when America, while still the world's primary hegemon, is no longer carrying the same moral compass as it once did, and what does that mean for future generations? And that's a question I really can't answer.
I don't think anyone can answer, but we've seen that. That's what I was mentioning about global parity kind of becoming, more of an issue, is countries that previously maybe would not have stepped out of line or kind of pushing the line really far and crossing the line.
India is a perfect example of this, continuing to buy Russian oil, and the Chinese obviously are pushing the envelope in a lot of ways. And
because it's been so long since maybe they've seen America flex that they're like, you're not going to do anything.
Well, I think it's a question of what can we do?
Yeah, are we even in a position to do anything?
Yeah, and so that's a
Putting out
realistic
flames
question.
at home.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
so that's one of the things. I'm not sure if it keeps me up at night, but it does concern me greatly for the future. What does the world look like throughout the remainder of the 21st century for my children as they develop in their careers? But for my grandchildren and my great grandchildren, just what will they inherit? And Courtney's living through this far more so right now herself.
I think for me, I mean, thinking like, just hearing about the Ukraine war and everything that, obviously with the G7 summit and them talking about helping Ukraine more and the United States offering more assistance, at what point, and I know we've talked about this before, but you look at and you're like, are we going to have to get in this war anymore? Like, are we going to have to put men on the ground? And I know we've talked about it, but at the same time, as a mother of young boys, I do worry about war and the fact that they could be drafted as it stands now and once they're old enough. And that's scary for me to think that I would have to send my kids to war potentially.
Well, I mean, and Sam's right there in the old wheelhouse.
Yeah, I'm in the wheelhouse, and to me, going back to not having kids yet, I have a kind of very long-term picture of kind of the problems, and I think to sum it up, all the things I'm concerned about are things that are trending in the wrong direction. It's not necessarily one issue. It's that I can't point to any things that concern me personally that I would say are getting better. I think the amount of people that are involved with religious institutions is still trending pretty poorly.
Yes.
The belief systems in general are poorly. We've talked about that, about believing in small businesses, believing in the U.S. government. The belief of anything is highly corrupted at this point. Wars are getting worse. Countries are towing the line more. The Axis and Allies seems to be coming back. All these things, the health crisis, all the things that concern me, I can't think of one I would say is getting better and not getting worse.
Other than the fact, and I will say this, if you're aware of it, Sam, and then you are also part of the next generation that are having children, and then you get to have a say in that development of your child and the development of, what you surround them by. So that's what I feel like maybe is my contribution to society as a whole, is to raise children, hopefully, to be better humans and better,
I think
citizens.
there's a higher level of responsibility on parents now than there was even 20 years ago, 40, 60, 80, to allow society to mold their children. I think that is becoming a much greater responsibility on the individual.
Well, I think, when I was coming around in the 70s, and to a lesser degree in the 80s, but in the 70s when I was in elementary school and what have you, I think the country as a whole, at least where I lived and where I went to school, everyone's still singing off of the same song sheet. We learned about American exceptionalism. That was taken for granted. Our culture was better than everyone else's. People attended religious services at least 3 times a month. There was belief in something greater than you are. I don't think parents had to worry quite as much about what was getting taught in schools.
Sure.
We didn't talk sexuality at Mount Brook Elementary School. We didn't talk about any of that stuff. The old 3 R's: reading, writing, arithmetic. And here I sound like an old man saying this is the way it was, but it was that way. Now, we did spend an inordinate amount of time learning how to write cursive, which is now just a colossal waste of time, and Miss Taylor is long gone. But see, I didn't need it.
I didn't need it. I'll never use this.
I didn't need it. Sorry, Miss Taylor. But it's kind of mean spirited. But now you have it. Sorry about that, Miss Taylor. But parents didn't have to worry that the kids were going to go to school and be taught something radically different than what they were learning at the house. That is, unless you were preaching something radically different at your own house.
And I think that's not a one side of the aisle thing. I think you could poll most of America and they would think they need to have a stronger say in their kids' belief systems than in the past.
Yeah, I would agree.
So that's something that I think might have changed a little bit. And the thing is, however, found out whenever I say this time is different, I find out that it's generally not. And I kind of am hopeful that perhaps what is currently happening in our society, and Sam, why you're sitting there saying everything that keeps you up at night is trending in the wrong direction, I'm hopeful that it won't always trend
Yeah.
in the wrong direction.
I think you hope the pendulum swings the other way.
And so, which begs the question: are there generational differences about pessimism and optimism? Are you more pessimist or optimistic about the future? And same for CBT here, and then I'll answer me.
Courtney's described me as the most pessimistic person of my generation.
Yes, I would think that that's definitely how you have to answer that question.
But look what happened in the past, 20 years. We've had a lost decade in the stock market, the greatest, recession since the 1930s. We've had a COVID shutdown. We've had just all kinds of awful stuff happen that has caused the pessimism.
Yeah, and Courtney, how about you? Would you say that you're more pessimistic or optimistic about the future?
I choose to be optimistic because who wants to live in a world where you're depressed about it all the time? But no, I think that we can have change, and sometimes, just to your point, I don't know how much of it is, obviously COVID happened, thousands of people died, or more.
Let's say more.
Yeah, more. But I also look at that as like a really great time in my family, where we really bonded, and it was nice to just break away from all of the responsibilities. The same thing, like when we sit there and talk about the debt ceiling, like, okay, well, yeah, that's doom and gloom, but then we also realize, this might be a little bit of manipulation of the media and the general public for a play on the two political parties trying to make each other look bad. So to me, I'm like, how much is it truly doom and gloom versus, like, I'm not going to let the noise get to me, and I'm going to look outside and the sun is shining. What do you always say, John?
Courtney, I don't know how many times I've had to remind you that no matter what we do today, the sun is going to come up in the east tomorrow. But Sam looked like he was about to bite his tongue while you were talking.
We had the biggest overstep of our civil liberties. In maybe the history of our country. I would not necessarily consider COVID to be the best time.
Well, I think, we have...
Sam looks like he just dropped the mic.
He's
got
awful.
Smirk on his face, and take that, CBT.
Yeah, I don't feel the same way, but it's over for the most part now, so...
C'est la vie.
We survived it.
So I would say that I'm probably a little bit more optimistic about the future. One, because... Going like you, Courtney, being pessimistic doesn't solve anything. But then, too, as y'all have heard my meemaw story plenty of times. My grandmother, who I love very much, grew up in 1911. Was born in 1911 on a farm in Eastern Shore, Maryland. Think about the stuff that we take for granted today.
Yeah, for sure.
There's so much science fiction to her. My father's father was born in 1891. He was 12 when the Wright brothers left their ground. We've talked about the Webb telescope. We talked about future, missions to Mars. And even my children, they don't really remember a world without the internet, certainly. But then even with smartphones. And John, who's my junior at Auburn, was born 2 months after the World Trade Center bombings. So a lot has happened.
Crazy.
A lot has happened in our nation's history. A lot of it bad. Since my meemaw was born, World War I, World War II, Korean War, Vietnam War. Great Depression, Great Recession, recession in the early 1980s, a civil unrest during the 1960s. What's going on now? And then at the end of the day, we kind of take a look up. We're still here. I'd say it's still the best country in the world. And like I just said, no matter what we do today, the sun's going to come up in the east tomorrow. We make stupid mistakes as Americans, but we always come out okay on the other side. And I'm hopeful that this is just kind of one of those blips in the road, sort of like the 2020s is going to be this generation's equivalent, your generation's equivalent of the 1970s. Some really bad fashions, some really bad music, but also some really good music, and we come out actually a little bit stronger for the wear. What do you think about that, Sam?
Well, I'll agree to disagree on some of it.
What do you think about that, CBT?
No, I agree with you. We obviously are the optimists, and
I think
Sam is not.
About the technological advancements to Einstein's quote about not knowing what World War III will be fought with, but
World War IV will be fought with
sticks and
stones.
stones. Yeah.
If anybody's there to serve.
That would be Sammy Downer right there.
Yeah.
I'm going to get you brown clothes. That's what
Yes.
you have to show up at the office.
Okay.
Talk
Debbie
about
Downer.
feline aids and all
Sure,
that stuff.
yeah.
You remember that character?
Feline aids.
So, all right, guys, I don't know how much we accomplished here today, but we did talk about maybe some generational differences regarding what keeps us up at night, regarding the passing scene, and then also what's going on in the economy and even just society, just in general. Maybe, if you're listening to this, will you have something similar that keeps you up at night? Perhaps something different? Talk about with people of other generations, other genders, and see whether or not they feel the same way. And through getting to know other people's differences, that's actually how you learn and also learn to get along. So with that, we always love to hear from you. Also, if you have any questions or comments, please, by all means, let us know. You can always drop us a line at tradingperspectives@oakworth.com, or you can leave us a review at the podcast outlet of your choice. As always, if you're interested in reading more or hearing more of what we have to say or how we think, you can always go to oakworth.com, take a look underneath the Thought Leadership tab, and find all kinds of exciting information, including links to previous Trading Perspectives podcasts, links to to previous Common Sense postings, our blog, and then also links to our magazine, Macro and Market. With that, y'all have anything else that keeps you up at night?
That's all I got.
That's it, John.
That's it today. That's all I've got today, too. Y'all take care.